Hello friends, I welcome you in this session. In this session, I am going to discuss economic growth cycles. So in the recent times, a lot of controversies going on, a lot of debates are going on. Are we in the middle of a recession, or is it just a slowdown? Or are we moving towards a depression? So all these questions, all these discussions we can understand if we are confident in the basic concept of economic growth cycles. So in this session, I am going to discuss economic growth cycle, slowdown versus recession versus depression. This is very crucial. And finally, what is the difference between the cyclical and structural slowdown, and at present, India is going through which one? So, what is business cycle or economic cycle? Friends, I have already discussed with you the concept of economic growth. So what is economic growth? Economic growth is a positive change or improvement in the amount of GDP of a country or in the amount of income. So when the income or GDP of a country is increasing, there is a positive change. This is called economic growth, right? So over a period of time, normally there should be growth, but it is not always the case. The life is unpredictable. Life is not a straight line. It is not a steady line. So if we are a student, for a few weeks it is possible that we are regularly studying for 8 hours, 10 hours on an average. But do you think that the condition will remain same if you continue to study for the 6 month? No, it will not happen. There will be days when there will be no study at all. Even if you are sitting in your room, but no study is happening. 0 hours of study. There are a lot of other work that you need to do, or maybe just that, you are not able to concentrate because you are overworked in the previous days, right? So there are fluctuations, there are ups and there are downs, right? Similarly, in the economy, there are ups and downs. There are times when there is huge production. The profits of the business are very high. There are a lot of jobs. Demand is also very high. And everyone is progressing. The government is enjoying a lot of taxes. A lot of money is there in the market. Businessmen are really investing into the businesses. So all the economic players, they are doing whatever they want to do, right? So that is considered to be the period of boom, right? So let us consider this small diagram. So in fact, let me show you the real diagram. So this is the diagram, right? So be with me. Don't try to read this entire diagram. Be with me and I will make you understand this diagram, right? So as I told, that economic growth has a long-term trend, right? So for example, if you talk about India, there was a trend between 1947 to 1990, which was called Hindu growth rate. That trend was the growth rate of was between 2% to 3% of GDP. So that was a long-term trend. Then came the period of 1991 to 2008. At that time, the growth rate was approximately between 8% to 10%. Right? So these are the long-term trends. And based on these long-term trends, this steady line, this steady growth line is framed. Right? Now, there are two major phases of economic fluctuation. Right? So if we talk about fluctuation, there are two major phases. One phase is the expansion, when the GDP is expanding at a very at a high rate, maybe, or maybe at a slow rate also. Main thing is there is expansion. Then another phase is contraction. Like the GDP is shrinking, right? So there can be expansion and there can be contraction. Or can we say expansion basically means the upward movement and contraction means the downward movement? Yes, this is true. So either there will be upward movement in the economic growth or there will be downward movement. So this is what we mean by the fluctuation. Any cycle, if you talk about any cycle, so this is the cycle, there will be upward movement, there will be downward movement, there will be upward movement, there will be downward movement. So this is, in the economy also the same thing is happening. Now, coming back to the economy. So this is a axis which is indicating real GDP. GDP in the real terms, like inflation adjusted income. It is not the inflated income. And this is the timeline. So over different years, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, and so on. Over different years, the economic growth rate is differing. So let us see. First, so this is the steady growth line. This movement, this upward movement is part of the expansion. And this is called boom. So this, you can see, this is the boom. So in the boom time, everything goes good, right? A lot of money is available to businessmen for the investment. They are investing, the production is increasing. As the production is increasing, more number of jobs are being created. As the more number of jobs are being created, the income of the people is increasing. Income of the people is increasing. They are demanding more amount of goods. The prices are also rising. Because the prices are rising, therefore, the profit of the businessmen are increasing and they are investing further. So this creates a virtuous cycle of growth and development, right? Now, everything has a limit, right? So in a day, we have 24 hours. In any case, you cannot study beyond 24 hours. Similarly, any economy has limitation. It is not that the economy can grow at 500% growth rate in a year. It has certain limit now. So that limit, when that limit is reached, this is called peak. So this is the point where the slowdown starts. So when the things are at peak, when you are studying consistently for maybe 12 hours for 5 days, do you think that 12 hours of peak for 5 days will sustain for a long? No. So on the 6th day, you will have to come down to reduce your stress level, to make up for your other tasks. Similarly, in the economy, when peak is there, then it has to slow down to come to the real circumstances. So at this peak time, the slowdown happens, the contraction happens. This contraction happens at this level, right? So contraction happens, that is, the GDP growth rate starts falling. The GDP growth rate starts falling, right? So this is called slowdown. So what is slowdown? You can see in the slowdown, the GDP is growing. It is not that GDP is not growing. You can see the GDP is still growing, right? But the rate of growth is less than the previous growth rate. So GDP is growing, but rate of GDP growth is reducing. It is less than the previous period. That is called slowdown. So if you compare with I give you one daily life example. You are moving in a vehicle, in your car. You have an Audi car, and you are, carrying that car at 120 kilometers per hour speed. So that is boom. Now you reach to 150 kilometers per hour. That is the maximum limit of Audi. For example, I don't know, I have never been in the Audi, right? I'm not that rich person. I'm just giving you a hypothetical example. So if you are an Audi person, please don't judge me that I don't know what is the maximum limit. So I really don't know about this limit. This example just came to my mind. That's why I'm discussing this thing. so that you can relate to your practical life. So the limit of OD is 150 and you suddenly catch the 150. Now you have started slowing down. From 150 you are coming to 120, 110, 100, 90, 80, and in the Indian condition, if you are in any highway, etc., I think 100 is the most appropriate speed. More than 100 is quite risky, and less than 100 is also not required, right? So you are at 100. So between 150, when it was peak, between 150 to 100, it is slow down. It is slow down. So you are reducing your speed. You are still moving. Your car is still moving. So economic growth is happening. It is not that economic growth is not happening, but the growth is happening at a less speed, right? So your car is slowing down. Similarly, economy gets slowed down, right? So this is how we can relate to the slowdown. Now, when this slowdown continues for 2 successive quarters or 6 months, 1 quarter means 3 months. So when this recession continues for successive 2 quarters or 6 months, then this is called recession. So the one term is slowdown, another term is the recession. So recession is just the more aggravated form of slowdown, right? It indicates that something is wrong. The government really need to intervene, right? This recession can be because of short-term reasons and because of long-term reason, or maybe because of both the reasons. So when there is recession, the government needs to intervene. The government needs to intervene in the form of reducing the interest rate. Government need to increase the RBI need to increase the money flow in the market so that businessmen are having less rate of interest. The government needs to intervene through giving more welfare schemes, through reducing the tax rates as the government has been doing in the recent times, through coming up with the various infrastructure projects so that more and more production, more and more employment is generated, and the economic recession is actually controlled, right? So this recession happens in this way. The government really needs to intervene at this stage, right? Now, so as I told you, this economic growth is happening, and till this economic growth is happening as per the long-term trend. Now, when the GDP growth becomes negative, so earlier, for example, it was 10%, then it came down to 5%, then it came down to 0%, and now this is minus 2%, this is minus 5%, and so on, minus 10%, right? So this condition is the condition of depression. That means, as per the long-term trend, the GDP is actually not growing, it is contracting, it is shrinking, right? So, considering your example of OD, your OD is actually going back. There is a reverse gear. It is not moving ahead. There is no slowdown, but it is much more bad. Your car, your OD is moving back. There is a reverse gear. So in the depression, reverse gear is there. The economy is actually moving backward. There is a contraction in the amount of goods and services which are being produced, right? There is less flow of credit available in the market. The production is decreasing. The jobs are decreasing. People don't have money to buy the goods. There is no demand, right? The government is not able to raise sufficient amount of taxes. Still the government has to spend. The fiscal deficit level is increasing. The condition becomes really bad, unmanageable, right? So these depression conditions, we can relate it to the 1932 USA depression, which was very severe, and there are some conditions to this I will tell you, right? And in 2008, the world also faced another recession. Again, that was not exactly the depression, but there was a recession, right? So can you see the difference between slowdown, recession and depression? So slowdown is like temporary, right? Temporary slowdown. decrease in the speed of growth. Then when this decline continues for 2 quarters or more than 2 quarters, then this becomes recession. And when the economic growth rate becomes so low that it is negative, then this is called depression. So slowdown, recession and depression, these are the 3 terms which are associated with the contraction, right? These are associated with the contraction, right? Now this lowest stage is called trough. So at the trough, the recovery starts. So this is the lowest capacity of the economy. So if for example you are a student, so on an average you will study for the 2 hours. So below 2 hours it's really difficult, because then you are not justifying your money. Your conscience will not support you. You will feel guilty. So even if you are studying not for clearing the examination, just to enjoy your life, still you will read for the 2 hours, consciously or subconsciously. You will be opening the newspaper, you will be going through the toppers stocks, or maybe talking to your friend about what is going through in the economy. So anyways, you are studying for the 2 hours. So that is your trough level. And when you realize that examination is coming, you start recovering in your studies, right? So recovery starts. In recovery, the government has to take a lot of measures, and everything starts falling into place, right? So again, this reaches to the long-term growth level, and finally again the cycle of boom peak it starts, right? So starting from this point and to this point, one cycle is completed. From the boom till the recovery, one cycle is completed, right? Now about the Indian economy, if you talk about Indian economy, right now we are in the mid of slowdown, right? We are in the mid of slowdown. We are not into recession yet. At the same time, this slowdown, is it a cyclical slowdown? Like the short term, medium term, which is bound to be there because of different short term reasons, or is it a structural slowdown? This slowdown which will take a lot of efforts and long term efforts, the major structural reforms to come out of it. So that thing we'll discuss in the coming session, in the coming slides. So I hope the concept is very clear. Now I will be discussing the theory part so that the things become much more clear to you, right? So the term business cycle or the economic cycle or boom bust cycle refers to the economy-wide fluctuations, right? So any cycle talks about the fluctuation in the production, in the trade. So trade means basically export and import, right? So there is a direct impact of the production level on the export and import. If production is good, then export tends to be more, and vice versa. General economic activity includes the jobs, it includes the demand, consumption, the government taxes, etc. Simply put, it is the upward and downward movement, right, in the level of GDP, and refers to the period of expansion and contraction. So in the previous slide, I clearly indicated, right, the upward is associated with the expansion and downward is associated with the contraction. In the level of economic activities around a long-term growth trend, right? So that steady growth line that we saw in the previous slide, that is nothing but the long-term growth trend. Expansion. Now there are different phases. The first phase is expansion or boom. So during this stage, there is an increase in the employment, income, production and sales. There is a steady money supply from the side of banks, and investment is booming. Everything is good. Peak. In this stage, the economy reaches its maximum level of growth and it starts to reverse. Prices are highest and economic indicators stop growing, right? So this limit is reached. This normally happens in the developed countries which have already reached their peak levels. Now contraction starts. In the contraction, the first phase is slowdown or downturn. This slowdown and downturn, they are the synonym words. Means that the economy is still growing but at a reduced rate. Recession is marked by decline in the real GDP. This is very crucial. We are not talking about nominal GDP, right? Because nominal GDP can be impacted by the price fluctuation, which is not a long-term phenomena. However, this real GDP is actually the actual decline in the physical production of goods and services. Like this quantity is impacted. The real GDP actually indicates the quantity part, not just the price part. So recession is marked by the decline in the GDP. An economic recession is broadly a downturn in the GDP of a nation for at least 2 successive quarters or 6 months. This is very crucial. This condition you should actually keep in mind. Unemployment rises, production slows down, sales start to drop because of a decline in the demand, and income becomes stagnant or decline, right? Coming to the depression, if the GDP of a country drops by at least 10%, very, very crucial. So this is one condition. Unemployment goes to 25%, then this is called depression. This is very, very crucial. This condition you should know, right? By these standards, the last depression America suffered was the Great Depression in the 1930s. So what happens? Economic growth continues to drop while the unemployment rises and production plummets. Trade is reduced, bankruptcies start, consumer confidence and investment levels also drop. So everything is in a negative cycle. Then comes the phase of trough. So this marks the end of contraction and it leads to the next step, that is the expansion. Recovery, it leads to the turn around and everything is good, and this actually marks the end of the business cycle. So here again you can see in this figure, this is trough, this is expansion, peak, contraction. So this is the growth trend and this is the actual line. So this is the growth trend and this dotted line actually indicates the actual growth level. Now let us see the UPSC question. So with this small discussion, we can solve one UPSC question. So this question was asked in year 2000 and now there are chances that this question can be asked again. So there are 2 lists given. One is the boom, another in the list 2 meaning is given. In the list 1 the concept is given, and in the list 2 the meaning is given, and we need to match. So match list 1 with the list 2 and select the correct answer using the codes given below in the list. So boom, business activity at a high level with increasing income, output, employment at the macro level. Okay, yeah, this is right. Still we can see, is it recovery or not? So recovery, steady rise in the general level of prices, income, output and employment. So this is steady rise and this is very high level. So yeah, so this is boom only and this is recovery only. These two are correct. Recession, a gradual fall in the income, output, employment with business activity at a low gear. Yeah, low gear you can see. Depression, unprecedented level of unemployment, underemployment, drastic fall in income, output and the employment. So this is depression only. So all the 4 terms are matching, right? So luckily this question appears to be it is actually the very easy question. So now coming to the code A says 1 2 3 4. I think this is the correct answer. So answer is option A. Very simple question. If you just understand the concept, the question it becomes very, very simple, right? I hope the concept is very clear to you now. Now coming to the recent debate that is going on, the slowdown. So in the recent time, the quarterly growth rate has declined. It has come down to below 5%, right? So all long term, in the recent couple of years, the growth rate was approximately 6.5%, the real GDP, but now it has come down to below 5%. So definitely it is a slowdown. Now this slowdown, is this slowdown a cyclical slowdown or structural slowdown? So different experts say different things. The experts have different opinion. So some people say this is cyclical slowdown. Even RBI annual report of 1819 has supported this. And they say this is a short-term trend and it can be controlled through fiscal and monetary policy. The government has taken a lot of steps in this regard. For example, cutting down the corporate taxes, giving boost to the housing sector through a fund, giving boost to the infrastructure sector, banking reforms, etc. Right? But despite all these steps and RBI cutting down the rate of interest successively, that cut down in the interest rate is not percolating down to the businessman, to the common man. And all the steps taken by the government are not being successful. So, based on this logic, the other set of economists, they say that this slowdown is much more than cyclical slowdown. This is actually a structural slowdown. So what is a structural slowdown? A structural slowdown is something which happens because of some structural defects in the economy. So if we talk about, for the calculation of GDP from the expenditure method, there are 4 parameters. One is the personal consumption. Another is the government consumption. Then we have the investment. And then we have the net exports, right? So when most of these 4 pillars are under stress because of different reasons, then this is called a structural slowdown, right? So for example, this investment is not happening because of the poor credit flow, right? Because of the FDI not coming, right? And because of the poor ease of doing business, so there is land reforms are not happening, land is not available easily, the labor reforms are not happening, the labor reforms are very rigid and businessmen are not really happy about it. In the agriculture sector, the people are not investing because the marketing reforms have not taken place, the supply chain management is very poor, right? Similarly, in the consumption, in the personal consumption, there are a lot of issues. The people don't have sufficient income because of the non-inclusive growth. The banking sector is not growing. That is why the people don't have the money to consume. So there are a lot of reasons. In coming to the exports, the global slowdown is there. There is a policy of protectionism. The countries don't want to import from outside unless exceptionally required. So there are a lot of reasons because of which the structural slowdown can happen, right? So let us see some of the recent coverage and concept. So cyclical slowdown, this is a period of lean economic activity that occurs at regular intervals. So cyclical slowdown is regular. So just like if you are a student, there are cycle, you are regularly studying for 10 hours and then suddenly comes a time when you start studying for the 6 hours for a week continuously because you're not able to bear that kind of stress which is there at the level of 10 hours. So this is called cyclical slowdown, which is part of the cycle, and this will be taken at the regular interval. So this is nothing but the cyclical slowdown. So it is part of the business cycle having its peaks and troughs. Such slowdowns last over the short to medium term and are based on changes in the business cycle. Now what can be the measures? The measures can be to the fiscal and monetary measures. The government can reduce the tax rates, maybe it can start some infrastructure projects. So these kind of initiatives the government has already taken. Monetary measures, so the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank can reduce the interest rate, repo rate, and can apply different methodologies to ensure that the reduction in the interest rate actually percolates down to the common man. So these measures are being taken actually. Temporary recapitalization of credit markets, right? So the government can support the NBFCs, the government can support the public sector banks through the recapitalization. The government is actually doing this, and not only this but the merger of the public sector banks, different banking reforms the government is taking. So this thing is also happening in India. Need-based regulatory changes. So this regulatory changes also needs to happen. For example, the labor reforms are being undertaken. The 4 codes on the labor reforms are being undertaken. What is a structural slowdown? So structural slowdown, on the other hand, is a more deep-rooted phenomena that occurs due to one shift of an existing paradigm. The changes which last over a long term are driven by disruptive technologies. So one reason can be the disruptive technologies. For example, if we talk about artificial intelligence, suppose there is a condition that artificial intelligence replaces most of the clerical jobs in India. So banks don't need the clerks. A lot of private companies, the IT companies, they don't need the people at the data entry operator level. So that will be the kind of structural slowdown which will be counted in this disruptive technologies. Changing demographics. This is also possible that demography is actually moving towards a higher age. So most of the people are non-working, or they are not. They are actually dependent. Not only they are not working, but also the dependent. So that is also one reason. And change in the consumer behavior. This is also possible. So these can be the different reasons for the structural slowdown. So in this scenario, the monetary and fiscal stimulus won't be enough to revive the economy. So structural slowdown, on the other hand, is called, it is more deep-rooted, and fixing such problems will require the government to undertake some structural policies, really. So we can understand 1991 problem. In 1991, it was a structural issue. The crisis was structural because our economy was almost closed. There was no export happening. The foreign capital was very restricted. Banking sector was very regulated. There was license permit quota raj happening in the industrial sector. So financial market, external sector, industry, everything was highly regulated. So all of those areas were actually opened up, and the reforms of liberalization, privatization and globalization came up. In the liberalization, the industrial regulations were liberalized. In the globalization, the domestic companies started integrating with the world companies. The economies got opened up. Export, import were easily allowed. The flow of capital, goods and the people were allowed. And in the privatization, the government companies were allowed to have the private ownership. The government ownership was started transferring to the private sector. So this liberalization, privatization, globalization, this was nothing but the structural reforms, and this is also called the structural policy. In the recent time, can you identify some of the structural reforms? So one of the structural reform that has been taken place in the recent time is goods and services tax. This is also great because this will impact the inflation, this will impact the government taxes, this will impact the center-state relations, this will impact everything, the formalization of the market. There is one more reform, IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So this reform has also actually transformed the market, the financial market. It has shunted out those people who have taken out the money of the people and are not ready to exit the business. So Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is also one of the very big structural reform, right? Similarly, what we need is the labor reform, which we are carrying on slowly. We need the land reforms, and ease of doing business reforms are already being taken place. We need more number of women in the working place. So a lot of structural reforms are required, which are being taken slowly, right? RBI's annual report highlighted that there are structural issues, the land issues, labor issues, and agricultural marketing. Agricultural marketing is a big problem. The people don't have, the farmer are getting less amount of remuneration for their sale, and the consumers are paying more amount of money for the goods that they buy. Now, at present, if we talk about what are the major factors affecting India's growth, so consumption is slowing down, which contributes approximately 55 to 60%. So if we talk about like GDP calculation from the expenditure method, the first thing is the personal consumption, then it is the government consumption, then there is investment, and finally there is export, right? So personal consumption is contributing nearly 55 to 60% of the India's GDP out of these four pillars, and this is being reduced because of reducing urban consumption and because of reducing rural consumption because of the different issues like drought condition and unpredictable monsoon. Savings. So first is the consumption, second is the savings and investment. Both are very closely associated. So savings are also getting reduced, and reduction in the saving has having a directly impact on the investment, which is declining from 34% in 2011 to 28% in the 2018. Friends, you don't need to remember these exact figures, just need to have an idea. Then NBFC crisis is also there because of liquidity crunch, and this has also impacted a big way. Then government finances are also very poor. The corporate tax cut, GST is not able to get sufficient amount of tax to the government. The expenditure is increasing, and finally the exports are also slowing down. So all the 4 parameters are actually under stress. So while there is a consensus that the economy is slowing down, so definitely it is 100% sure that there is a slowdown, right? There is change in the gear of your OD. The debate is still going on whether the slowdown is structural or cyclical. In its annual report for 2018-19, the Reserve Bank of India had said that the slowdown was cyclical rather than structural, which would have required deeper reforms. There has been no change. So this is very crucial. So why, if anyone asks you why there is no structural slowdown, because there is no big change in the demographic. Our demographic is very, dividend oriented. We are having more number of people coming in the working age, so we will have demographic dividend, right? Demand will also increase, the population increasing, everyone wants to have more and more amount of goods, so demand will also keep increasing. And ability of the companies to supply, the company's ability is increasing, the number of people who can work is increasing, the companies are adopting new technologies, entrepreneurship is increasing, the government is supporting the entrepreneurship through the Startup India, Stand Up India, and different ease of doing business reforms. So demographic dividend, demand, and the company supply is actually not curtailed. So it is not a structural slowdown as of now, right? However, some experts believe that the current slowdown is more than a cyclical one and of the structural type, which is evident from the fact that successive rate cuts by the central bank have not yielded the desired result. It is just an opinion, but there is no big evidence that it is not a structural, it is a structural slowdown. What are the steps? So there have been subsequent rate cut by the RBI in the interest rate. A stimulus package has been given by the government to different sectors, for example, the housing sector, the infrastructure sector. Surplus money has been transferred by the RBI to the government, so it will actually ease out the fiscal burden of the government. Recapitalization of the public sector banks to tackle the NPA crisis, merger of the public sector bank that will enhance the credit culture and spread the investment, and infrastructure sector steps are also being taken. What is to be done? So if we see the latest economic survey of 2018-19, we can see that economic survey clearly identified that we actually need to boost the investment, especially the private investment, which is the key driver which drives the demand, creates the capacity. So when there is a investment, what happens? When there is a private investment, for example, the private sector is investing into a power project. So what will happen? The demand will increase, the demand for the labor, demand for the steel, demand for the cement, and different associated components, right? Creates capacity. So when power plant is built up, it creates new capacity for generating the electricity. Increases labor productivity. Yes, so the new power plant will be having more skilled labor because it is based upon the latest technology. So labor productivity has to increase. Introduces new technology, allows creative destruction, and generates jobs. So I can show, I just indicated you that simple creation of or establishment of one power plant has resulted into all this. So this is the power of the private investment. So what is the key? The key is private investment, right? So we should focus on the investment. Earlier economic survey also, the economic survey of 17-18 also indicated that we should not focus on the saving much. We have to focus, but the major focus has to shift to the investment. The savings are already, we have already focused upon savings through different measures like demonetization. We can get more money from the foreign countries to make up for the savings slowdown in India. But what is required is investment more than the savings. Much needed structural reforms are required in the land, labor, and agrarian policies to take structural dimension of the slowdown. So I hope the concept is very clear to you, and with this I complete this session, and I really want to thank you for watching this session, and I hope that after this session, when you read the newspaper, your analysis will be at a different level. You can understand the concepts more clearly. You can identify the discussion of recession versus slowdown, the structural slowdown versus the cyclical slowdown, and you can give your own opinion also. So with this, I complete this lecture. Thank you very much.